If you don't mind, I'd like to introduce you to some friends of mine, okay? This is John, this is Paul, this is George, this is Ringo, and this fella here is Pete Best. Now, pop quiz. Who's this? Do you remember? Do you know his name? What about him? What's his name? Or, him. Who's he? You're probably having a lot of trouble recognizing these garlic cloves by the names I gave them. Now, if you look at the garlic cloves all together, you can see that they're actually all unique. They're all shaped slightly differently, they have slightly different coloring, they have slightly different patterns. The green stems that grew because I left them in my fridge for too long are all different lengths and different widths, and one of them is broken, and this one is tall and skinny, and this garlic clove is a lot fatter than the others. And, you know, there are unique patterns and shapes and arrangements to the same basic parts, but all of these garlic cloves are still made up of the same basic parts, right? They're all a body and a stem, they're all the same general color, they're all the same general shape, they're all garlic cloves. And even though, you know, you can see that they have differences to them, when I show them to you individually, it's really hard to remember which one is which. Because you don't have a dedicated part of your brain that is devoted entirely to recognizing cloves of garlic, because there is no possible evolutionary advantage to doing that. However, you do have a dedicated part of your brain that is devoted to recognizing different human faces. There is a specific part of your brain that processes visual information and picks out human faces and differentiates them from each other, right? When you meet a new person, your brain goes, yeah, that's a different face from every other face I've seen, right? I'm recognizing the subtle nuances of where the nose is placed and how wide the mouth is and the shape of the eyes and how low the brows are on the forehead. And I'm cataloging that face away and I remember it forever. But you don't do that with garlic cloves. You know, garlic cloves kind of all look the same to you, even though they're not, right? And you can see that they're not. You're not blind to the fact that they're not all the same. You can see that they're different, and yet, when I show you them one by one, they're all just garlic cloves to you. I don't have a dedicated part of my brain for human faces, or the part of my brain dedicated to human faces doesn't work. Now, face blindness is often misrepresented in movies or TV because it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it if you don't have it. In fact, it's hard to wrap your head around not having it if you do have it, because recognizing or not recognizing faces is something that is so innate to your existence. In fact, I didn't realize that other people could recognize faces to the degree that they did until relatively recently. I just thought that I was bad at remembering names. Movies and TV shows and, you know, image manipulations will often illustrate face blindness as seeing everyone with a blank face, or seeing everyone with a blurry face, or, you know, some sort of surreal hellscape of people walking around with their faces all mixed up, or big scribbles in front of their heads or whatever. But it doesn't look like that. You know, my reality looks the same as your reality. I can see the same faces that you see. I just can't recognize them. Or at least, I don't have a dedicated part of my brain that is devoted to recognizing them. If I get to know people long enough, I can recognize them in the same way that if you spent a lot of time with these individual cloves of garlic, you could probably find ways and employ strategies to tell them apart from each other, right? With enough exposure, you'd become familiar with these different cloves of garlic, in the same way that people in specialized fields can become familiar with, you know, different subtle nuances to, you know, the things they have to work with, or people who have pets can tell the difference between seemingly identical dogs, right? To the average person, every husky basically looks the same, but to an owner of 3 huskies, they all look totally different, right? I can tell my friends and family apart, but random strangers who I've just met, who I haven't had the time to learn the faces of, kind of all look the same. I can see superficial details, I can see skin color, I can see hair color, I can see eye color, I can see height, but, you know, if I meet 2 blonde men who are of generally the same height and build, they're functionally identical to me. In the same way that these 2 garlic cloves, despite looking very different, are functionally identical to the average person who has not been tasked with memorizing what they look like. And that's what's so hard about representing this, is that it's not a visual thing, it's a perceptive thing. I'm seeing the same thing you're seeing. I just don't have this evolutionary superpower that you're not even really aware that you have. Now, this is fascinating to me as someone who works in the visual arts. You know, my entire life I've worked in comic books, I've worked in film, I've worked in architectural design, and so the way people perceive things is fascinating to me, and representing the way people perceive things is fascinating to me. And accurately representing facial blindness is a problem, right? It is this sort of fascinating quagmire of, you know, trying to figure out how do I put this on screen accurately in a way that isn't sensationalist or isn't horrifying. Because my day-to-day existence isn't horrifying. My day-to-day existence looks just like yours. It's just my visual processing is a little bit different. The movie Anomalisa takes the interesting route of having everyone literally look the same, right? The main character has some form of facial blindness that causes him to see everyone in his life as the same person except for the eponymous Lisa, who is different until he gets bored of her and then she starts looking the same as everyone else. But this is not really what facial blindness looks like because, you know, I can still see hair color and skin color and height and build. It's just, you know, faces are generally interchangeable, right? The other interesting thing about Anomalisa, though, is that I didn't realize at first that this was the device they were using because it didn't clock to me as weird that all of these animated characters had the same face, because most people in movies and TV shows kind of have the same face to me. Now, part of why I didn't clock this was that it's animated, and I kind of assumed that this was just the art style. You know, there's a lot of animated shows where everybody kind of looks the same, but yeah, it's interesting that, you know, an attempt to depict a version of face blindness was not perceptible to me, someone with face blindness, which I guess, you know, if you do it accurately, that would be the case. I find it really annoying when characters in movies will, like, drastically change their hair or grow a beard, or when a movie will have like two blonde women with the same height and build, or like, you know, two brunette men with the same haircut, because they may as well be the same person to me. I really appreciate costume designers and hairstylists that go out of their way to really differentiate all their characters, because I have a lot of trouble telling characters apart or remembering who's who in a movie. If someone shows up for one scene and then shows up 5 scenes later in a different outfit with a different hairstyle, I do not clock that it's supposed to be the same person, because how am I supposed to know? They're dressed different. Something that is interesting is that there's a lot of celebrities who stereotypically look identical that I don't think look similar at all. Natalie Portman and Keira Knightley look nothing alike to me. I think part of this is that I've learned to employ different strategies for telling people apart. I tend to recognize people based on their gait or their oral posture. When I'm looking at someone's face, the way they hold their jaw is very important when it comes to recognizing them. And Natalie Portman has an American accent and Keira Knightley has a British accent, and you can visually see that they have different accents and different idiolects, and they hold their jaws differently, and that makes them look very different to me. You know, Natalie Portman and Rooney Mara may as well be the same person, because they both have brown eyes and brown hair, and, you know, they both have kind of the same build and height. But Keira Knightley and Natalie Portman are worlds apart from each other because one has a British accent and one does not. Anyway, perception is something that I find really interesting. It's something that is very hard to visually depict. It is something that is very hard to explain to people. And this thing with the garlic, I usually use apples, but I don't have apples, so we're using garlic, is the best way that I've come up with to explain it, right? It's not that I can't see human faces. It's not that I can't recognize them. It's that my ability to recognize them is the same as your ability to recognize something that is not a human face, right? My ability to tell people's faces apart is the same as your ability to tell, you know, Granny Smith apples apart, or tell huskies apart, or tell brown horses apart, right? You can see the differences, you can learn the differences, you can work at differentiating them, but you don't have an innate ability to do so. You don't have a dedicated part of your brain that is, you know, doing the work for you and processing it for you and going, that is a different, you know, blonde 6'2" man from that blonde 6'2" man. I don't have any of that. I don't have the part of my brain that does that for human faces, and that makes certain things very difficult, but it also makes a lot of things very interesting. Anyway, this is just a random little vlog. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know what to do with this garlic. Can I use this if it's sprouted? Is this still edible? I don't know. Anyway, goodbye!